Hey everybody, and welcome to the 4th episode in my Crossy road game tutorial series. Today I'll be making the ground generate rivers, and of course to cross those rivers I'll be adding lily pads so that way you can jump on them and ride them across the rivers. And then to make gameplay a little bit more interesting, I'm going to add missiles that will launch at you. That way you actually have to go right to left. So let's hop right into it. Okay, so before we do, I would like to show you the costumes and sprites you'll need. First of all, in the squish particles, I've added 2 new particles. One is called water, and it's just kind of like a little bubble, and then water pop, which is just the popping version of the water, so it's similar to the other particle we have. Then in the ground, I have a new ground called ground 4, and it's just a little river, pretty simple. Next, I have sprite called lily pads, and it is just a lily pad quite a bit bigger than the player, as you can see here. Then I have just lily pad 2, which is just like a lily pad with a pretty flower on it. And last but not least, I have a new sprite called missile, and it just has a little warning sign that says, hey, there's gonna be a missile. Then a missile 1 and missile 2, which is just kind of a animation for the flame. Now let's start programming. Make sure you hide the missile and the lily pad, that way they're not in your way. But let's start with the ground and make it generate the river. So first of all, in this costume setup, let's change some values. If pick random 1 to 25 equals to 1, then switch costume to ground 1, which is our grass. Otherwise, if pick random 1 to 3 is equal to 1, then let's switch costume to ground 4, which is our brand new river. Otherwise, let's go ahead and just put road script. So that is our new generation script. But now, as you can see, if we go, we should see that the blank patches of grass should be more rare, and there should be more roads than the occasional river that will spawn in. So let's keep going until we find a river to make sure that this works. And there we go. Look at that. We already have a little river, but it's not really interesting because look at, we could just go over it. That's not cool. We want to be able to fall in there. Let's go ahead and make a new list and name this lily pad spawn Y for all sprites. So this list is pretty similar to the car spawn Y, just instead of cars, it's going to keep track of the lily pads. Let's go ahead and duplicate that and do the add ground Y to lily's pad spawn Y and put it right underneath the ground 4. Then of course in the delete spawn Y, we need to also delete the lily's pad spawn Y. So if the length of lily pad spawn Y is greater than 2, then delete 1 of lily pad spawn Y right underneath there. So now that is all good. Now let's go ahead and go into the player, change this broadcasting a bit. So let's start by just doing the when green flag clicked broadcast start game. Let's do a new when I receive start game like so. Let's just go ahead and do broadcast reset player, and you can go ahead and head into the cars and delete this reset cars there, and instead of doing it in the cars, do that right underneath there, except we're going to do and wait. So let's do reset player and wait, then we can do reset cars and wait. So it's just going to go ahead and go through everything and reset it. Then last but not least, let's go ahead and do a new reset and name this reset lily pad and wait at the end. So now the game should still work exactly the same, but that just kind of cleans up the scripts a bit. So in the lily pads, let's do a when I receive reset lily pads. Let's go ahead and make some new variables. First one is lily pad X, and go ahead and copy all of that and make sure you do for the sprite only. Then paste what you just copied in, do for the sprite only, and rename the X to Y. So now we have an X and a Y for the lily pads. Now in the reset lily pads, let's go ahead and set both of those to 0. Delete all of lily pad spawn Y. Now let's go ahead and do a when I receive start game, go into the cars, and we can pull in some of our scripts. Go ahead and just pull out the car X and car Y and pull that into the lily pads on top of the go to. Now you can go ahead and put those car Y and car X back in there. Make sure you do that, otherwise your cars are going to stop working. And now we have the go to in there. But now we can do for the when I receive update for the lily pads, we can do the lily pad X minus scroll X and lily pad Y minus scroll Y. So now this should be scrolling. Now that we've done that, we have a brand new variable called clone in this sprite. So let's go ahead and reset that in the beginning. So do a when I receive start game, set that clone to no, wait 0.1 seconds, and then let's go into the cars and pull in this script right here with the if car spawn Y equals blank, all that. Let's do if lily pad spawn Y equals blank, pull out a create clone and a wait block, and then delete everything hang in there. Then we can do a wait 2 seconds down here, and then we can delete all that, and we can actually just do switch costume to lily pad 1. Now let's make it to where it spawns both type of lily pads, the flowered version and the normal one. So if pick random 1 to 5 is equal to 1, then let's switch costume to the flower lily pad. Otherwise, duplicate this and switch costume to the normal one. Let's do a when I start as a clone, and then make a brand new block and name this clone setup. Then make sure you do run screen without refresh to make this happen super duper quick. Then when I start as a clone, let's do clone setup. Next, we'll do an if touching. So we want it to detect if it's touching another lily pad, and if it is, then it'll delete itself. But if we go into the touching, it doesn't show lily pad because it's in the same sprite. So let's go ahead and go into another random sprite and pull out a touching, and then do lily pads. Then go ahead and pull that into lily pads, and now we have an if touching lily pad. So now we just put that in there. It's going to detect if it's touching itself, then it's going to delete this clone. Next, we will set this clone to yes. Then we'll set the lily pad Y to item length of lily pad spawn Y of lily pad spawn Y, like so. So what that script is going to do is it's going to set the lily pad Y to the latest item in the lily pad list. Make a new variable for the speed of the lily pad. Let's name this lily pad speed, like so. This is going to be for this sprite only. Then let's go ahead and set that lily pad speed to pick random 2 to 4. So that way it has some variation in the speed. Next, let's go into the motion and set rotation style to all around, point and direction, pick random 1 to 360. And last but not least, do a go to front. So that is the clone setup for you right there. So let's go ahead and test and make sure that this is working by going until we find a river in our ground. Okay, so as you can see, we found a river, and there's some lily pads spawning every 2 seconds. And as you can see, once in a while, there'll be a flower one. So let's do a forever loop underneath this clone setup and do set the lily pad X to -300, which is all the way on the left side of our playable area. Do a repeat until block, and then let's do lily pad X is greater than 300, which means it's traveled all the way to the right side of the screen. Then we're going to change the lily pad X by lily pad speed. And that's where that variable comes in. Then let's just go ahead and do a turn 1 degrees counterclockwise or clockwise, whatever you would like. And then once it's reached there, let's delete this clone. Okay guys, so I was doing some little bit of testing, and I'm not sure what I was thinking. So this lily pad speed, if we set it to the pick random 1 to 3 or whatever we had, that means lily pads are going to be over top of each other, because the faster ones are going to go over the slower ones. So we don't actually need this. So you can go ahead and delete all the instances of lily pad speed and go ahead and just delete that variable overall. Instead, let's go ahead and change this lily pad X by 2 or maybe 3. Instead of a wait 2 seconds, let's do 1.1 all the way to 3.5, let's say. So now basically what this is going to do is make it to where the lily pads won't be all weird and spawn on top of each other, because that's just crazy and doesn't look good. Wow, that's a lot of taxis. So I found a river, and look at this. Look how much better this looks. So now they just randomly spawn from a random time. Sometimes it's a long time. Sometimes they really wait a little bit. Let's make this maybe 1.3 seconds to 2 seconds. So now as you can see, they spawn a little bit more often. Now that we have this spawning under control, you may notice that, well, they still don't do anything. First, let's make it to where when we touch them, it looks like we actually are bouncing on them. So do a when I start as a clone in the lily pads, a forever loop, and an if, and do touching, and change this to player. Next, let's set the size to 50%. A wait 1 second, wait until not touching player. That way it doesn't continuously do this, and then it'll look really weird. And because we have this change size by little algorithm here, it'll always go back to 100%, so that way it won't stay at 50% size. And as you can see, when we touch them, it does a nice little bouncy animation to look like we're on top of them, which looks awesome. But the layering is incorrect. In the player, let's do a when I receive start game, then a forever loop, a wait until touching lily pads, then if we are, then go to front, then we're going to wait until not touching lily pads. And now you should see that if we click on on this when I see start game, as you can see, we are actually on top of the lily pad. I want the player to actually move along with the lily pads. So to do this, let's go into the player, and on the when I receive update, all you need to do is do a if touching the lily pads, then change the player X by 3. Now this 3 is replaced by whatever the speed of your lily pads are. So if it's 10, then you're gonna change the player X by 10. That way it matches. But now as you can see, if we are on the lily pads, we actually float along with them, which is really cool in my opinion. But the last thing I want to do is make it to where you actually fall in the water. So I kind of want to rehaul our death script a little bit. So let's make a new block and name this game in the player, by the way. Game over, then space and do particle amount like so, and do an input and do amount. So this is how many particles we want, and add a text label and name this particle type, and add an input and do type, and now do run screen without refresh. So see all of this stuff, just go ahead and pull that in there. Do repeat the amount like so. Next, let's make a new variable and name this particle type. This is going to be for all sprites, because when we fall in water, I want there to be different particles like in the beginning. So if we get hit by a car, it's just going to be the dust, but if we fall in water, it's going to be the bubbles. So we're going to have to make a variable to keep track of that. So in the very beginning, let's set the particle type to type, then repeat amount like that, and now we can do an if else and an equals, and do if the type is equal to water, which is going to be the bubble particles. Then we're just going to do a repeat 2 times, and then a change the ghost effect by 50% so it completely fades out, and then a hide. Otherwise, we're going to do nothing for now. And we're going to go ahead and put that underneath the cam shake. And then let's go ahead and pull in the stop the script for the if touching cars, and just do this game over particles up there instead. So we're going to do particle amount to 10 for touching cars, particle type to dust, which is our particle type. So now this should be working better. In the particle, let's do an if else and do if the particle type is equal to dust. Then we're going to pull in everything we have into that. Then let's duplicate all of that stuff, do a switch costume to water and water pop at the end instead. And let's also go ahead and set that particle velocity to pick random 4 to 5, and make sure you take that out of the beginning and duplicate that. Then for the particle velocity 4 to 5, do that in the dust. Then for the water, let's go ahead and set the particle velocity to 2 to 3. That way it's a little bit slower. Next, in the bubble, let's turn 1 degree clockwise like so. And then for the squish particle X, let's do times particle velocity times 2. So now as you can see, if we get hit by a car, it should still work like normal. There we go. Go ahead and duplicate all of this and click on it. As you can see, boom, we have all of that. But let's try something else. Let's do water. Now, as you can see, if we go ahead and restart this project and do it, boom, as you can see, there's some brand new particles, and they go more on the x-axis. Now, once you've done that, you may see something. Where's our player? That is because we hid it. So let's go ahead and do a show for the reset player and a clear graphic effect. So now once we start, there we go, our player is back. So let's go ahead and duplicate that and delete that if touching and change it to if touching color. Now we need to stop this project and drag in this ground like here, and do if touching the color and pick that watercolor in the middle, whatever your color may be, and not, then do a touching and not touching lily pads, and then do another and like here, do and not touching the color. So let's take out the touching and change this to color, and once again pick the color of your grass. So if we're not touching the lily pads and not touching the ground and we're touching the blue, then we're going to do the new particle 10 of them and do water instead like so, and put that right underneath the if touching cars. So there we go, very easily we have made a script to make it to where when we fall in water, let's test this out. As you can see, nothing really happens. So for the when I start as a clone in the particles, let's do a go to front for the when I start as a clone to make sure that this is working right. So let's go ahead and go until we find a river, and there we go. As you can see, look at that, we fell in the rivers and bubbles spawn. So now now let's go ahead and get hit by a car to make sure that the car is working correctly. So here's another river we can jump across and use the lily pad. And now, oh no, there we go. We got hit by the cars and it did the right particles. So for the last bit of this episode, I would like to add the missiles into the game to spice up gameplay a bit. So in the very beginning in the player, for the when I receive start game, do a new message and name this spawn missiles. Then in the missiles, let's do a when I receive and do spawn missiles. Next, let's make a new variable and name this clone with a question mark for the sprite only, of course, just like all of the other things. Set that clone to no and then hide in the very beginning. Next, do a forever loop and an if, and do if the game over is equal to no, and that just means that we're playing the game currently. Then we're going to wait 1 second, except we're going to do pick random 1 to 3 seconds if the game over is equal to no, so duplicate that. Then we're going to show and switch costume to warning. So now let's go ahead and make 2 new x and y variables and name these missile X, and you can go ahead and copy that, make sure that is for the sprite only, and then paste it and do a new variable missile Y and name this for the sprite only. So now we have an X and Y variable, and while we're at it, we might as well just make a missile spawning one. So make sure you do missile spawn X, set the missile X to the player X, that way it spawns at right underneath the player. Then let's go ahead and set the Y to -150, make sure it's at the bottom of the screen, and we're going to set the size all the way up to 400%. Then we're going to wait 2 seconds after that and repeat 4 times, and let's do a blinking animation. So add 2 wait times in there and do a 0.1 like this, and then 0.05, which is half of that. Then on the top do show, and on the bottom do hide, so that way it just blinks a little bit. Then we're going to set that brand new variable we just made, the missile spawn X at the very bottom, to missile X, which is its current X position. Then we're going to create clone of myself, show, and repeat 3 times, change Y by -15, which will make it go off the screen, and then hide, and then once again, let's duplicate the set clone to no, set it to no right at the end. So there is your big old script of the spawning. So now let's go into the player and pull in this go to right there. Now let's do a when I receive update, so that way it goes to the right spot, except we don't want player X and player Y. We want missile X and missile Y, minus scroll X and minus scroll Y. Next, do an if else and do if the clone is equal to no, which means this is the normal sprite. Then we're going to actually move this go to the else. If the clone is equal to no, then we're going to set the X position to all of that. So basically what that means is for the clone, it's going to be on the scrolling axis, but for the sprite, it's just going to scroll for the X axis, not the Y axis. Next, let's do a go into the player and do the change size by algorithm like we've done before, just as the 100, and change this to divided by 2, and then a go to front layer. So let's do a when I start as a clone and make sure to set the clone to yes. So now on the when I start as a clone, go ahead and also do a show block there, do a switch costume to missile. For the missile, go ahead and head into the score and pull this point and direction, all of that stuff into there, and put that in the clone equals to no, and change these values. So let's do times 400, then times 5. Next, let's go ahead for the when I start as a clone, set that missile X to missile spawn X. That is where that variable comes in, and the missile Y is actually going to be player Y. Set that to the player Y, but we want it to be below it. So let's do -150, and next let's do point and direction 90, and make sure you design your missile facing right up. That way it will be in the right direction. Otherwise, if you make it facing to the right, just do point and direction 0 instead, and then do forever and a change, and change that missile Y by 20 like this, and do next costume, except we don't want it to rotate through all of them. So let's do a if the costume number is greater than 2, then we're going to switch back to the very first costume, which is Missile 1. Now you should see that once in a while, this message will pop up, it'll rotate nicely, has a good animation, and the missile will fly up to the top of the screen, animated and everything. So let's do another when I start as a clone, and a if else, and make sure you do if game over is equal to no, and in the else do a delete, and then if it equals to no, just wait 0.1 seconds and a wait until, then do touching, so it's going to wait until it's touching the edge, then if it is, then it's going to delete itself, and then the missile will fly up to the top of the screen and delete itself. So the missile is basically done. Now we just need to make the player detect if it's getting hit. So go into the player and duplicate the if touching cars and change this to the missile and make the particle amount to like 20, and it's going to be dust. We should see that once we get hit by this missile, boom, as you can see, it flattens us and there are a ton of particles that spawn and it triggers the game over. So basically what this does is it forces you to use the right to left keys. That way it kind of teaches you as you go. So like here's a good example. I need to cross, but the missile spawns, so I need to move over. This was a pretty packed episode, so if you've made it to this point, congratulations. You should be very proud of yourself because we have done a lot. We redid the particle system, we added the ground to generate in a new way, we added lily pads and missiles, and it all works good. I hope I explained this well, and I also do hope you enjoyed it or just learned something, and if you did on any of those, then make sure to hit the like button and consider subscribing. Anyway, this has been Owen, and I am out.